Hello, and thank you for allowing this moment for yourself. You can let go of all focus now. Just allow your attention to soften. As my voice gently carries you to a place of rest, a place where we find the story of a very strange and very necessary London profession. It's a tale that begins not in a graveyard, but in the gleaming halls of science, where brilliant minds faced a very grim problem. As you begin to settle, just one gentle thought. If this space feels like a comfort to you, you might consider a soft tap on the like or subscribe button. But only if that thought feels as effortless as a quiet breath. And if you feel moved too, you can leave a comment with your city and the time of night where you are. It's always nice to know where these stories land. There's a quiet community forming here in the gentle hours. And so find that gentle darkness in your room, perhaps with a soft blanket pulled a little closer, as we begin our slow drift into tonight's tale. The air in London is thick tonight. It's a familiar dampness, a mix of coal smoke and river fog that clings to your coat and blurs the flickering gas lights into hazy, golden orbs. The sound of iron miners' carriage wheels clattering over cobblestones echoes down the narrow streets, a rhythmic, almost soothing percussion for a city that never truly sleeps. But you are not out in the fog miners-bound streets, not yet. Instead, you find yourself inside, in a place of warmth and fervent learning. You're sitting on a steep, wooden bench, part of a tight semi-minus circle of other young men, all leaning forward with a quiet, intense anticipation. You're in one of the great anatomy theatres of the late 18th century. The room is unheated, a deliberate choice to slow down the inevitable, and the chill from the stone floor seeps through the soles of your boots. The air smells faintly of carbolic acid and something else, something vaguely organic and unsettling that you've learned to ignore. In the center of the room, under a bright, focused gas lamp, lies the reason you are all here. On a simple wooden table rests a human body, draped in a plain linen sheet. Your lecturer, a man of considerable fame with a booming voice and eyes that seem to see right through flesh and bone, stands beside it. He speaks of the human body as a divine machine, the perfect, intricate clockwork of muscle, nerve, and bone created by a master craftsman. His passion is infectious. You and everyone else here believe you are on the brink of a new age of medicine, an age where surgery is not just butchery with a prayer, but a precise and life-saving science. But there's a problem, a huge unspoken problem that hangs in the cold air. To fix a machine, you must first understand how it works. You need to be able to open it up. Look at all the delicate parts, see how they connect and interact. And that right there is the heart of the dilemma. The lecturer can talk all day about the elegant sweep of the femoral artery or the complex branching of the vagus nerve, but words are not enough. You need to see it. You need to trace it with your own finger. You need a map. And the only map is the human body itself. Your lecturer pulls back the sheet. There's a collective, soft intake of breath. This is the moment. For the next few hours, he will guide you through the territory of the dead, revealing secrets that can save the living. He shows you a network of nerves so fine, and explains how a misplaced cut just a fraction of an inch to the left could paralyze a man for life. This is not practical knowledge in the world. And you realize with a sudden, sinking feeling that this single body is a precious, finite resource. You and the 50 other students in this room will share it. It will be dissected, studied, drawn, and memorized over the next week or two until there is simply nothing left to learn from it. And then what? Where does the next lesson come from? This is the great thirst of your time. The thirst for knowledge. And the supply is desperately, tragically scarce. You see, the law is very particular about who gets to be a map for future doctors. The only bodies legally available for dissection are those of murderers who have met their end at the gallows. It sounds dramatic, and it is, but it's also wildly impractical. There simply aren't enough executions to supply every anatomy school in London, let alone in all of Britain. Some historians today still debate the moral calculations these pioneering doctors made. We may never know for sure if they turned a blind eye to what was coming, or quietly encouraged it. But what you know, sitting on that hard wooden bench, is that your education, your ability to one day heal a sick child or set a broken bone properly, depends entirely on what lies on that table. The progress of medicine itself is chained to the gallows, and it's not a fast moving chain. As the lecture ends and you file out of the cold theatre, back into the foggy London night, the question lingers in your mind, unspoken but urgent. The city is home to 1 million souls, and every day, hundreds of them pass from life into death. Their bodies are carefully washed, dressed, and sealed in wooden boxes. Their secrets, the very maps that could save countless others, are locked away and buried 6 feet under the earth. Someone, surely, must be thinking the same thing. Someone must be looking at all those quiet churchyards and seeing not just endings, but opportunities. The cold night air does little to clear your head. As you walk, the question from the lecture hall follows you, a silent companion. The city is a labyrinth of brick and shadow, and in every parish, behind every stone church, lies a small patch of earth crowded with the dead. You pass one now, a dark rectangle of land behind a rusty iron fence. The headstones are crooked teeth in the gloom, each one marking a locked box, a sealed secret. The waste of it all feels more profound with every step. You turn into a familiar, noisy tavern, the air thick with pipe smoke and the smell of spilled ale. A few of your fellow students are already there, hunched over pewter mugs. The conversation, as it often does, drifts to the day's lesson and the grim reality of your shared profession. One body for the whole class, a young man named Davies mutters, staring into his drink, and a scrawny one at that, barely enough to see the musculature. An older student, a cynical fellow who has been at this for a few years, lets out a short, humorless laugh. You'll get used to it. The law gives us what it gives us. The murder act of 1752nd, a grim gift and a rare one. You know the law, of course. Every medical student does. It was designed as the ultimate deterrent. For the crime of murder, you would not only lose your life at the end of a rope, but your body would be denied a Christian burial. Instead, it would be handed over to the surgeons for public dissection. It was meant to be a punishment beyond death, a final, terrifying indignity. The very thing the church promised to protect, the sanctity of the body awaiting resurrection, would be violated by men of science in a cold, stark theatre. To truly understand the scarcity, you have to have seen it firsthand. And you have. A few months ago, you joined the thronging, jostling crowd at Tyburn to witness a hanging. It wasn't a somber affair. It was a spectacle. A chaotic public holiday. There were vendors selling meat pies and gin, families with children on their shoulders, all clamoring for a better view of the gallows. The man to be hanged was a known highwine, and the crowd treated him like a celebrity, cheering when he gave a defiant speech from the scaffold. Then the moment came. The drop, the sudden silence, and the slow, awful swinging. But for you, the most memorable part came after. The moment the body was cut down, a frantic, undignified scuffle broke out at the foot of the gallows. On one side, the man's family, weeping and desperate, tried to claim the body for a quiet burial. On the other, a group of burly men, assistants from a surgeon's hall, pushed forward with a cart. It was a literal tug minus of war over a fresh corpse, right there in the mud, with a carnival crowd looking on. That day, the surgeon's one. The body was loaded onto the cart and whisked away, a precious prize for the advancement of knowledge. But you saw the faces of the family, their grief mixed with a profound horror. This is a point historians still debate. Was the public stirrer truly of the anatomist's knife? Or was it the deep-seated fear of an improper burial, of being denied a peaceful rest in consecrated ground? For most people, the two were inseparable. That single, pot-over body had to supply the lessons for dozens of students. And in a city like London, with multiple anatomy schools all clamoring for subjects, the demand was insatiable. The gallows might provide, on average, a couple of dozen bodies a year. The schools, however, needed hundreds. The numbers simply didn't add up. It was like trying to quench the thirst of a desert with a thimble-full of water. This is the system. This is the legal, state-sanctioned source of your education. A public execution, a grieving family, a mad dash for the corpse. It's inefficient, it's gruesome, and it is nowhere near enough. As you sit in the warmth of the tavern, the noise of the crowd fades into a low hum. The oldest student leans in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The law provides a trickle, he says, a sly look in his eye. But the river of knowledge must flow. And rivers, well, they have a way of finding their own course, don't they? He takes a long drink of his ale, leaving you to ponder his words. The city-esque graveyards, once symbols of peaceful rest, now seem to hum with a different kind of potential. A market, waiting to be opened. The older student's words linger in the smoky air long after He is gone. A river finding its own course. It's a poetic way to describe a very ugly business. Over the next few weeks, you start to hear the whispers, the hushed conversations in the corridors of the anatomy school after a new subject mysteriously appears on the slab, one that clearly didn't come from the gallows. There are no public announcements, no paperwork. It just arrives, usually in the dead of night, delivered in a large sack or a tea chest. You learn the name for the men who bring these silent deliveries. They are not called thieves or grave robbers in the hushed tones of the medical world. They are called resurrectionists. It's a piece of dark, cynical humor. They don't bring people back to life, of course. They just bring them back to the surface. And as you begin to listen, you realize this isn't some small, furtive operation. It's an industry, a shadow profession with its own rules, its own language, and its own hierarchy. These aren't just random ghouls driven by a morbid impulse. They are businessmen, providing a crucial, if illicit, service to one of the most respected professions in the country, medicine. Without them, the river of knowledge would indeed slow to a trickle. Every one of your fellow students knows this, even if they never admit it aloud. It's the great, open secret of your time. One evening, your curiosity finally gets the better of your fear. You find yourself talking to one of the school's porters, a grim minus-faced man named Finn who has seen more than his share of late minus-night deliveries. For the price of a pint of gin, his tongue loosens. They're a rough lot, Finn says, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Not the sort you'd invite home for tea. Ex-minus soldiers, out-minus of minus diggers, men with strong backs and weak morals. He tells you they work in small gangs, usually 3 or 4 men to a crew. There's a leader, the captain, who negotiates the prices with the surgeon's assistants. There's the muscle, the diggers, and often there's a scout, someone who loiters around funeral services, noting that a fresh, promising grave. This is not a job for the faint of heart. It requires a specific blend of courage, callousness, and practicality. You have to be willing to work in the pitch dark in all weather with the constant threat of discovery. You have to be strong enough to haul a dead weight out of a 6-foot hole. And you have to be pragmatic enough to see the contents of a coffin not as a person, but a commodity. Finn tells you about the famous ones, the legends of the trade. Men like Ben Crouch, the so-minus called King of the Resurrectionists, who ran his operations like a military campaign, complete with spies in the hospitals to report on interesting deaths. These weren't petty criminals, they were organized, efficient, and utterly ruthless. They had networks of informants, sextons, undertakers, parish clerks, all paid a small fee for information about recent burials. A fascinating and morbid tidbit you learn is that a child's body, or a small, was often more valuable than an adult's due to its rarity and use in studying childhood diseases. The whole enterprise is a dark mirror of the legitimate world. It has suppliers, middlemen, and wealthy clients. The client, a respected doctor of anatomy, needs a raw material. The resurrectionist, the supplier, acquires the material from a source that is, shall we say, unregulated. The transaction is simple. Cash minus based and happens through the back door. The morality of it all is a tangled mess, and it's a topic that modern historians still struggle with. Were these men parasites feeding on public grief, or were they the unsung, grimy heroes of medical progress? The answer, you suspect, is both. They were undeniably criminals, violating one of society's deepest taboos, but the knowledge gleaned from the bodies they supplied would, without question, go on to save thousands of lives. Every surgeon who learned to safely remove a tumor, every doctor who finally understood how the heart actually pumped blood, owed an indirect debt to some rough man with a shovel and a disregard for consecrated ground. As Finn finishes his gin, he looks at you with a calculating eye. "It's a dirty job," he says, his voice low. "But the pay is good. Bet the pay is good. Better than hauling crates on the docks, that's for sure. And there's always work. People, you see, are always dying." He leaves the unspoken offer hanging in the air between you. For a young, ambitious medical student, short on cash but long on the need to understand the human form, the porter's unspoken offer doesn't just hang in the air, it follows you home and settles in the corner of your small cold room. You are, like most students, perpetually poor. Your tuition fees are high, your lodgings are cheap, and your diet consists mainly of bread and weak tea. The idea of earning in one night what you might otherwise save in 6 months is a powerful, seductive thought. But it's more than just the money, it's the access, the chance to truly learn your craft, not from a crowded lecture hall, but up close. A week later, you find Finn again. You don't have to say a word. He just nods, a grim understanding passing between you. He tells you to be at a certain pub near the Bethnal Green parish grounds on the next moonless night, and to wear sturdy boots and dark clothes. And don't eat a heavy supper, he advises with a wink. It can be unsettling work for a novice. The night arrives, cloaked in a thick, wet fog that muffles all sound. The pub is a rough place, filled with the raw, loud energy of men who work with their hands. You find the crew in a quiet back corner. There are 3 of them. The leader, a weary man with a broken nose named Jack, looks you up and down with an air of professional skepticism. The other 2 are broad, silent men who seem to be made of little more than muscle and grimy wool. Jack doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He slides a dented pewter flask across the table. "A little something to warm the bones," he grunts. "It's raw, fiery gin, and it burns a welcome path down your throat," he explains the night's target. "A carpenter, buried just 2 days ago. Young, strong, died of a sudden fever. Prime condition. Fresh is best," Jack says, discussing produce at a market. The surgeons pay top coin for fresh. Around midnight, you set out. The fog is so thick now that the gas lamps are just faint smudges of light in the oppressive dark. You move like ghosts through the sleeping city, your footsteps swallowed by the damp air. You carry the tools, which are surprisingly few, a couple of stout wooden shovels, a length of rope, and a crowbar. Jack explains that you travel light to avoid suspicion from the night watchman. You reach the churchyard, but one of the big men, with a grunt of effort, simply lifts it off its rusty hinges. The silence inside the cemetery walls is profound. It's a different kind of quiet than the city's. It's a heavy, ancient silence, filled with the weight of generations. The headstones jut out of the fog like silent, accusing fingers. For a moment, a wave of primal fear washes over you. This feels deeply, fundamentally wrong, but Jack is all business. He navigates the rows of graves with an unnerving familiarity, finally stopping at a patch of freshly turned earth. There are no flowers, no mementos. The poor couldn't afford such things. This, you realize with a sickening lurch, is what makes it a perfect target. Less fuss, less chance of a grieving family member keeping watch. "Right then, lad," Jack whispers, his voice a dry rasp. "Time to earn your keep, watch and learn." The process is shockingly efficient, a masterpiece of grim engineering. This is one of those curious historical details that often gets lost in the horror of the act itself. That would take too long and make too much noise. Instead, they dig a single, narrow shaft down to the head of the coffin, about 5 or 6 feet away from the headstone. The 2 big men work in a brutal, silent rhythm. The soft thud of their wooden shovels against the wet earth the only sound. They pile the dirt neatly onto a canvas sheet to avoid leaving a mess. It takes less than half an hour to reach the coffin lid. You can hear the dull thunk as a shovel strikes wood. Then Jack takes over. He uses the crowbar to pry open just the top section of the lid, the part over the deceased's head and shoulders. There's a sharp crack of splintering wood that makes you jump. Then comes the part that will haunt you. Jack lies on his stomach, reaches down into the dark hole, and loops the rope under the arms of the corpse. Heave, he grunts. You and the other men pull. The body, wrapped in a simple burial shroud, slides out of its coffin with a soft, wet, sucking sound. It's an undignified, grotesque birth back into the world of the living. Once it's on the grass, they quickly strip off the shroud. Never take the cloth, Jack mutters, seeing your confused expression. Taking the body is just borrowing. Taking the shroud, that's theft of property. That'll get you transported. Whether a body could be considered property was a point of serious contention in the courts of the time, and a loophole the resurrectionists exploited. They bundle the naked corpse into a large canvas sack. The whole operation from start to finish has taken less than an hour. The men work with the practiced ease of factory workers on an assembly line. They refill the hole, tamp down the earth, and replace the sword so skillfully that in light, you can barely tell the grave has been disturbed. It's a terrifying, almost magical, act of violation. As you lift your corner of the heavy sack, the reality of what you've just done settles in your stomach like a cold stone. You are a resurrectionist. The sack is heavy. You stumble as you help carry it back to the pub, the wet canvas pressing against your shoulder. The gin has worn off, and you're left with a cold, clammy unease. The other men seem unfazed, talking in low, gruff voices about their next job. The thought of another such night makes your stomach clench. Back at the pub, Jack counts out your share of the money. It's more than you've ever seen at once. Enough to pay off your debts, buy decent boots, and perhaps even a warm coat for the winter. The financial incentive is undeniably strong, but the cost is higher than the money. This is a truth that few medical students openly acknowledge. The next morning, you find yourself at the anatomy school, attending the dissection class. The air is still cold, but now it smells different. The corpse on the table is not your colleague's previous subject, but the one you helped exhume the night before. You recognize the carpenter's hands, the simple, strong hands that once crafted wooden things and are now frozen in an eternal stillness. The memory of the night's work, the heavy sack floods back, sharper than any scalpel. As the lecturer begins the dissection, explaining the intricacies of the muscles, tendons, and organs, you find yourself watching, not with the detached curiosity of a scientist, but with a sickening sense of complicity. You know where this body came from. You know the violation it endured to arrive here, and the knowledge stains everything you see. The tools of the resurrectionists were surprisingly simple. A few well-made implements, carefully chosen for the task at hand, were the key to their ghoulish trade. A long, thin iron bar, called a lifter, was perfect for probing the earth, testing for fresh graves. A shovel, of course, but a specially designed one, with a curved blade that allowed the dirt to be lifted and tossed without disturbing the surrounding ground. A drag was a long, hooked pole, used to snag the coffin lid, allowing it to be pulled open quickly and quietly. The rope, as you saw, was essential, as was a sturdy canvas sack to transport the goods to their final destination. And finally, a good knife, for cutting the rope or, on rare occasions, silencing any unwanted witnesses. The tools of your trade, you realized, could be the tools of your undoing. The simplicity of these tools makes them relatively easy to come by, and makes the profession appealing to the desperate. But there's another, more unsettling aspect to it all. The more you learn about the trade, the more you realize how meticulously planned it is. The efficiency, the lack of emotion, the attention to detail. These aren't professionals. They are operating in a market, and they are responding to the laws of supply and demand. The lesson continues, the lecturer's voice droning on. But you can't focus. You keep seeing the faces of the other men, the cold, calculating eyes of Jack, the brutal efficiency of their movements. You start to wonder if this is really what you want. Over the next few weeks, you participate in several more excursions. Each one becomes a little easier, a little less shocking. You begin to learn the rhythms of the trade, the signals, the unspoken rules. You learn to ignore the cold, the darkness, the smell of damp earth and decay. You become desensitized, the most disturbing part of the entire experience, a fact that's often overlooked in the sensational accounts of the time, is just how quickly you become accustomed to it. The human mind is remarkably adaptable. You learn that there are different levels of resurrectionists. Some are small minus-time operators like Jack Screw, content with a few quick digs a week. Others, the so-minus called high flyers, run larger operations, controlling entire cemeteries, with fleets of carts and paid informants. The more you see, the more you realize that this isn't just a sideline for desperate men. It's a complex, underground economy that touches every corner of London society. And the price of progress, the price of knowledge, is paid in the coin of human dignity, stolen under the cover of night. And you are now one of the coin collectors. The delivery is always the most nerve-racking part of the night. After the frantic earth-stained work in the graveyard, you must transport your heavy, awkwardly shaped stack through the winding, semi-patrolled streets of London. Every shadow seems to hold a night watchman. Every distant shout sounds like an alarm. The city, which felt asleep and vulnerable an hour ago, now feels like a web of potential threats. Your destination is the back door of the anatomy school, an unmarked entrance in a dark, narrow alley that reeks of refuse and disinfectant. This is a side of the esteemed institution you never saw during your formal admission. There are no grand columns here, no polished brass plaques. Just a heavy, splintered wooden door with a small, discreet peephole. Jack gives a specific, rhythmic knock. A moment of tense silence follows, broken only by your own ragged breathing. Then, you hear the scraping of a bolt from the inside, and the door creaks open just enough for a sliver of lamplight to cut through the darkness. The face that appears in the gap is Finn's, the school porter. His expression is dour and impassive, but his eyes quickly dart to the sack at your feet. He gives a curt, modern gestures for you to bring it inside. You haul your grim cargo into a small, windowless stone room. The air is cold and carries the same faint, antiseptic smell as the lecture theatre, but stronger here, more concentrated. The only furniture is a long, sturdy table, much like the one in the main theatre, but this one is scarred with countless cuts and stained with old, dark liquids. On the wall, a few iron hooks hang empty. It's a purely functional space designed for transactions, not for comfort. An assistant surgeon is waiting, a young man not much older than you, but with an air of weary authority. He doesn't greet you. He doesn't even make eye contact. His entire focus is on the contents of the sack. With a practiced, almost bored movement, he untees the rope and rolls the body onto the table. This is the inspection. The surgeon's assistant moves with a cool, professional detachment that is far more chilling than the graveyard gallows humor of Jack Screw. He checks the body for signs of decomposition, for any obvious injuries or diseases that might render it unsuitable for study. He is a buyer examining merchandise. He runs a hand over the limbs, testing their suppleness. He opens the mouth to check the teeth, a key indicator of age and general health. It's a strangely intimate and yet completely impersonal examination. One of the oddest and most sought-after commodities was the body of a very tall person, as it allowed for a more dramatic and clear demonstration of the entire muscular and skeletal system. Giants, in death, were worth a small fortune. This one's fresh, Jack says, his voice a low grumble. No more than 2 days in the ground. Good teeth, too. H.E.S. a salesman pitching his product. The assistant grunts in agreement, his examination complete. It will do, he says, without a hint of emotion. He then turns to a small locked cash box on a nearby shelf. This is the moment of payment. There's no paperwork, no receipts. Just the clinking of coins being counted out onto the table. The assistant pushes the pile of shillings and crowns towards Jack, who scoops them into a leather pouch with a practiced flick of his wrist. You and the crew are dismissed with a nod. As you leave, you see the assistant covering the body with a fresh linen sheet, preparing it for its final, scientific purpose. The transition is complete. The carpenter from Bethnal Green, a man with a name, a family, a life, is now simply the subject. He has been transformed from a person into a pedagogical tool. Walking away from school back into the anonymity of the London night, the weight of the coins in your pocket feels both reassuring and damning. You have just witnessed the full, grim cycle of this underground economy. It begins in the quiet grief of a funeral, moves through the mud and darkness of a desecrated grave, and ends on a cold stone slab in the pursuit of knowledge. The whole system, you realize, is built on a series of calculated hypocrisy. The surgeons, men of science and social standing, publicly decry the deplorable acts of the resurrection, while privately relying on them completely. The law condemns the act, but the loophole about property makes prosecution difficult, a point which legal historians are still untangling to this day. And you, the student, are caught in the middle, benefiting from a crime that you are now actively helping to commit. It is a morally corrosive environment, and you can feel it starting to change you, chipping away at the clear lines between right and wrong, between healer and ghoul. The coins in your pocket have a tangible weight, a cold, hard reality that grounds the surreal experiences of the night. Back at the pub, which stays open for late workers like yourselves, Jack empties the leather pouch onto the sticky table. The soft glow of the oil lamp catches the silver, making it shine. This is the moment the abstract horror of the graveyard is converted into the concrete necessity of survival. Jack divides the money with the practiced hand of a man who has done this 1,000 times. The total payment for the carpenter was 10 guineas. A guinea, you know, is 20 minus 1 shillings, a sum that a common labourer might not see in a month of back-minus breaking work on the docks. 10 of them feels like a king's ransom. He slides a portion of the pile to each of the two big men, who grunt their approval and immediately order another round of gin. He then pushes a smaller but still significant pile of shillings towards you. Your share, novice, he says. You didn't run, and you pulled your weight. You earned it. The economics of this trade are as grimly fascinating as the act itself. The price of a body wasn't fixed. It was a fluctuating market governed by the cold laws of supply and demand. A standard adult male in good condition, like your carpenter, fetched a decent, reliable price. This was the bread and butter of the Resurrectionist's trade. But there were premium products. A body with a rare or unusual medical condition, a large tumor, a peculiar deformity, anything that would make for an interesting lecture, could be worth double or even triple the standard rate. The Resurrectionist scouts, often medical students themselves, would keep an ear out in the hospitals for such interesting deaths. It was a ghoulish form of futures trading, speculating on the educational value of human misery. The freshness of the subject was the single most important factor. A body exhumed within a day or two of burial was prime. As the days turned into a week, the value plummeted. Decomposition was the enemy of the anatomist and the resurrectionist alike. This created a frantic urgency to the work. A funeral on Tuesday meant a potential exhumation on Wednesday night. There was no time to waste. Size also mattered, but in a way that defied simple logic. You might think a larger body would be worth more, but the opposite was often true for the most lucrative sales. The bodies of children, referred to in the trade as smalls or stills, were incredibly valuable. They were rare, as families guarded their lost children with a particular ferocity, and they were essential for understanding childhood anatomy and diseases. A single small could be worth as much as 20 or 30 guineas. The thought of unearthing a child's coffin is a line you hope you never have to cross. Then there was the issue of damaged goods. A body that showed signs of a post-mortem examination, or autopsy, as it was sometimes called, was worthless. This is a strange detail that historians find quite revealing about the era's medical ethics. The surgeons wanted to be the first to open the body. They wanted a pristine, unread book. They would reject a delivery if they suspected another surgeon had already had a look. The money, as Jack divides it, is also used to cover the costs of doing business. A few shillings must be set aside for the hush money, bribes for parish sextons who would look the other way, or for watchmen who might happen to patrol a little less diligently on certain nights. Another portion went to informants. And of course a significant amount was spent on gin, the fuel that seemed to power this entire dark industry. You look at the silver coins in your hand. They feel dirty, tainted. But you also know what they represent. They represent a full belly, a roof over your head, and the ability to continue your studies. It's a devil's bargain, and you've just shaken hands with your side of the deal. You are part of the supply chain now, a vital cog in the machine that turns grief into guineas. and guineas into medical knowledge. The moral ambiguity of it all is a luxury you feel you can no longer afford. The money you earned on that first night doesn't last long, but the memory of it does. It creates an appetite. You find yourself falling into a routine with Jack Screw, a grim rhythm of waiting, watching, and working in the dark. The city by night becomes your illicit workplace. The initial shock has faded, replaced by a kind of weary competence. You know the weight of a shovel, the sound of splintering pine, the heavy silence of a desecrated grave. But you soon learn that the watchmen and the occasional grieving family are not your only concerns. This dark marketplace you've entered is a competitive one. And competition, in this line of work, is a dangerous thing. One evening, in the usual pub, Jack unrolls a crude map of London's parishes. HES planning the next few nights' work. He points a dirt miner's skate finger at a large, promising minus-looking cemetery in Southwark. Plenty of custom there, one of the big men mutters, using the trade's euphemism for potential bodies. Jack shakes his head, a definitive, sharp movement. No, he says, his voice flat. That's Holloway's ground. We don't touch it. This is the first time you've heard it spoken of so plainly. The graveyards of London are not a free minus for minus all. They are territories carved up and controlled by rival gangs of resurrectionists. It's an underworld geography that exists invisibly alongside the city's official maps. The large, poorly guarded burial grounds of the poor were the most prized territories, the equivalent of fertile hunting grounds, and they were fiercely defended. You learn the names of the other major players. There's Holloway's crew, known for their brutality, a gang run by a man named Naples, who specialized in a quick, smash minus and minus grab approach. And then there were the freelancers, desperate small minus timers who were a constant nuisance, trying to poach from established territories. The competition was gentlemanly. It was a war fought in whispers and shadows. Gangs would post lookouts not just for the authorities but for each other. Fights were common, brutal, ugly brawls in dark alleyways with shovels and crowbars used as weapons. A broken or a cracked skull was just a cost of doing business, but the most insidious form of warfare was sabotage. Jack tells you a story of a night his crew had done the hard work of unearthing a prime subject, only to be ambushed by Holloway's men as they were leaving the cemetery. A vicious fight ensued, and while Jack's crew managed to drive them off, they returned to their prize to find that the rivals had taken a knife and slashed the body's face and torso. This is a particularly chilling detail of the trade. Surgeons demanded pristine subjects for their anatomical demonstrations. A deliberately mutilated body was a message, a vicious and economically crippling act of war. It was better to destroy the product than to let a rival profit from it. Historians still argue about the true structure of this underworld. Was there a single kingpin, a figure like Ben Crouch who truly controlled the entire London trade, issuing orders and collecting tribute like a mafia don? Or was that a legend, an exaggeration born from fear and fireside stories? The other view is that it was more of a chaotic, shifting landscape of independent crews, forming temporary alliances and engaging in constant, low-level turf skirmishes. The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere in the murky middle. The reality of this competition becomes clear to you one foggy night. You've just finished a job in a small churchyard near the river. As you slip out through a gap in the wall, you see them. 3 figures, standing silently across the narrow lane just watching you. They don't move, they don't speak. They are just shadows, their faces hidden by the fog and the darkness. But their presence is a clear, unambiguous statement. This is their territory you just trespassed on. Jack mutters a curse under his breath and tightens his grip on his shovel. Walk on, he whispers, don't run. Don't look back. You walk for what feels like an eternity, the weight of their silent stares pressing on your back. The heavy sack on your shoulder, which moments ago felt like a promise of payment, now feels like a liability, a piece of evidence marking you as a rival. You have not only broken the laws of the land and the sanctity of the grave, you have also broken the unwritten, brutal laws of your own dark profession. And the punishment for that could be far swifter and more final than a judge's sentence. The encounter with the rival gang leaves a lingering chill, a constant, low minus level hum of anxiety that wasn't there before. It's no longer just about the dead and the darkness. It's about the living men who share your profession and view you as an obstacle. Every shadow in a churchyard now holds a double threat. But the danger isn't just from within the trade. As you continue your nightly work, you begin to notice a change in the city itself. A new kind of awareness is dawning. What was once a hushed rumor, a terrifying story whispered by the fireside, is starting to become a matter of public conversation and, very quickly, public panic. It starts with small things. A grieving widow returns to her husband's grave a week after the funeral and notices the earth seems disturbed. A groundskeeper finds a splintered piece of a coffin half minus buried in the mud near the cemetery wall. A mourner discovers a tattered piece of a burial shroud snagged on a thorn bush. These isolated incidents begin to weave together in the public imagination, fueled by the sensationalist headlines of the city's cheap newspapers. The penny dreadful-s. Stories appear, lurid and exaggerated, of ghouls and night doctors who stalk the city's graveyards. They print woodcut illustrations, showing skeletal figures with shovels, looming over open graves under a full moon. It's the stuff of nightmares, and London is eating it up. The fear is palpable, and it spreads like a contagion. You hear it in the taverns, in the markets, on the street corners. People who once spoke of death with a kind of resigned piety now speak of it with a new, active terror. The fear wasn't just of death itself, but of the desecration that might follow. The idea that your final resting place was not final, that your body would not be left in peace to await the resurrection, was a profound violation of the era's deepest religious and social beliefs. This fear, you quickly discover, is bad for business. Parishes begin to lock their cemetery gates with new heavy chains. Some churches even hire their own night watchmen to patrol the grounds, armed with cudgels and dulled muskets. They aren't the official city watch, who are often lazy or beribable, but men from the local community, fiercely protective of their own. One night you experience this new vigilance firsthand. You and Jack's crew are scoping out a small but promising churchyard in a respectable part of town. As you crouch in the shadows of the wall, you see them, two men, sitting on a stone bench near the main gate, bundled against the cold. One holds a lantern, its yellow light cutting a small, protective circle in the darkness. The other has a large, menacing looking dog lying at his feet. They are keeping watch. Family, Jack whispers, his voice tight with frustration. Sitting with the new minus departed, we'll find nothing here tonight. This becomes a more common sight. The wealthier the family, the more likely they were to hire guards to keep a personal vigil. It's a sad, desperate act. Imagine the grief of losing a loved one, now compounded by the need to physically defend their corpse from predators like you. It's a thought that, for the first time in a while, manages to pierce through your practiced callousness. A curious piece of graveyard lore that emerges from this period is the practice of burying with straw. Poorer families who couldn't afford a watchman would sometimes fill the grave with a mixture of earth and straw. The idea was that the straw, when dug through, would make a distinct rustling sound, loud enough to alert anyone nearby. It's a simple, pathetic form of security system, a testament to their desperation. Whether it ever actually worked is a matter of historical debate, but its existence speaks volumes about the level of public fear. The city is waking up to your trade. The invisible world you operate in is becoming visible, and with visibility comes resistance. The easy pickings are becoming rarer. The risks are increasing. The river of supply, which once flowed so freely in the dark, is now facing dams and obstacles at every turn. And you know with a sinking certainty that when a profitable business is threatened, it doesn't just disappear. It adapts. It becomes more desperate, more ruthless, and even more dangerous. The fear that has gripped the city is no longer an abstract tether. It has taken on a solid, physical form. You see it in the eyes of mourners at every funeral procession that wins its way through the streets. Their grief is now tinged with a hard, defensive edge. They are not just laying a loved one to rest, they are entrusting a precious, vulnerable treasure to the earth, and they are acutely aware of the pirates waiting in the shadows. This fear gives birth to a new, grim ritual, the wake, not the traditional wake, the gathering of friends and family to share stories and drink to the memory of the deceased. This is a different kind of wake. A graveside vigil. Your crew targets a recent burial in a churchyard on the outskirts of the city. The deceased was a shopkeeper, a man of modest means, but respected in his community. It should be a straightforward job. But as you approach the cemetery under the cover of a cold, drizzling rain, you see the flicker of a lantern near the new grave. Crouching behind a crumbling stone wall, you peer through the gaps. You see a small group of men, 4 of them huddled large oilcloths, sheet propped up on sticks to create a makeshift shelter. They have a small brazier burning, its coals glowing a defiant red in the gloom. One of them holds an long minus-barreled fowling piece, a shotgun, across his lap. Another has a heavy minus-looking cudgel resting by his side. They are the shopkeeper's sons and his friends, and they are not going anywhere. They are watching over the dead. This becomes an increasingly common obstacle. It's a direct human response to the threat you and your colleagues represent. Families bound by love and a sense of duty would take it upon themselves to guard the graves of their recently departed for a week, sometimes 2, until they believed the body was no longer fresh enough to be of interest to you. It's a miserable, exhausting task. They sit through the cold, the rain, the suffocating darkness, fueled by cheap gin, grim determination, and a profound sense of violation. The graveyard, once a place of quiet contemplation, becomes a nightly battleground, a contested territory between grief and greed. The confrontations, when they happen, are ugly. Jack tells you about a time his crew stumbled upon a vigil they hadn't anticipated. The grieving father, a massive blacksmith, was armed with a smithing hammer. The fight was short, brutal, and ended with one of Jack's men nursing a shattered kneecap. You lost not only the potential profit from the body, but also a valuable member of the crew for months. This practice of watching the dead leads to some truly bizarre and tragicomic scenes, which are often recorded in the newspapers of the day. There are stories of families setting up elaborate systems of tripwires and bells around the grave. One particularly inventive family, it was rumored, buried a small, explosive charge with the coffin, designed to go off if disturbed. The effectiveness of such measures is questionable, and historians still debate how widespread these more extreme tactics really were. But the stories themselves served as a powerful deterrent. Even the funeral rites themselves begin to change. The timing of the burial, for instance, becomes a strategic decision. Some families opt for a burial just before dusk, hoping that a full night of watching will be enough to deter the first, most dangerous wave of interest. Others might try to disguise the exact location of the grave, or even temporarily bury the coffin in a different, secret location before moving it to its final resting place weeks later. You are no longer just fighting against the silence and the dark. You are in a direct contest with human love and loyalty. And that is a far more formidable opponent. As you retreat from the shopkeeper's guarded grave, empty minus-handed and soaked to the bone, you feel a grudging respect for the men huddled under that oilcloth. They are defending their own. In their world, you are the monster in the dark, the ghoul from the penny dreadfulness made real. And you realize that for every grave you rob, you are not just stealing a body, you are confirming their deepest fears and reinforcing the terror that is slowly strangling the city's peace of mind. The nightly vigils, the armed guards, the tripwires and bells, they are all temporary human solutions to a persistent, ghoulish problem. They required education, endurance, and a willingness to sit in a cold, wet churchyard for a fortnight. But this is an age of invention, of iron and steam and ingenuity. It was only a matter of time before fear and desperation were forged into a technological solution. Your first encounter with this new defense comes on a promising night in a wealthy parish cemetery. The target is a recently deceased merchant, a man whose family has paid for a prime plot and a handsome headstone. It's exactly the kind of grave that suggests a well scared -4, and therefore fresh, subject. There are no signs of a vigil, no flickering lanterns, no armed guards. It seems almost easy. You begin to dig. The earth is soft and yields easily to your shovels. But then, about a foot down, your shovel strikes something hard. Not the dull thud of wood, but the sharp, ringing clang of metal. Jack mutters a curse and kneels down, scraping away the dirt with his hands. In the dim moonlight you see it. An intricate grille of thick iron bars bolted together to form a heavy, cage-like structure that completely covers the grave, extending several feet on all sides. The bars are set deep into the ground, anchored in heavy stone. It's a mod safe. The word itself sounds like a medieval contraption, something out of a gothic horror story. And that's exactly what it looks like. A cage for a coffin. A tomb of iron. It is the physical embodiment of the city's terror, a permanent, unblinking guard forged in the fires of a blacksmith's shop. You and the crew spend the next hour probing its weaknesses, looking for a way in. You try prying at the bars with the crowbar, but they are too thick, too deeply set. You try digging around it, but the structure is wider than the grave itself, its foundations buried deep in the earth. It is a fortress, and you do not have the tools to breach it. It is, you realize with a sinking feeling, a perfect defense. Defeated, you have no choice but to abandon the job. All that effort, all that risk, for nothing. The mort safe has won. This invention, born out of Scottish paranoia in the early 1800s, quickly spreads to London and other major cities. They came in various designs. Some were these heavy, cage-like grills. Others were like giant iron boxes, lowered over the coffin before the grave was filled. Some were even designed to be rented. The heavy iron structure would be placed over the grave for a few weeks, and then, once the body was deemed no longer valuable, it would be hoisted out by a crane and used for the next customer. It was a ghoulish rental service for the paranoid rich. The mort safe represents a significant escalation in the arms race between the resurrectionists and the public. Before, it was a battle of technology and resources. Only the wealthy could afford such a device. The cost of a custom-built iron mort safe could be more than the funeral itself. This created an even deeper, more troubling divide. The bodies of the rich, protected by iron and stone, could rest in peace. The bodies of the poor, buried in simple pine boxes in overcrowded public grounds, remain the primary, vulnerable targets for your trade. The class divide extended even beyond the grave. Historians are fascinated by mort safes. They are such a stark, physical manifestation of a specific historical fear. You can still see them today in some of the older churches in Edinburgh and London, rusty and overgrown with ivy. They are silent, iron skeletons, monuments to a time when people were so afraid of the doctor's knife that they buried their dead in cages. Looking at the impenetrable iron grid in the moonlight, you feel a sense of professional frustration, but also something else, a strange, unsettling premonition. The public is getting smarter. They are getting stronger. The easy days of your trade are over. The river of supply is being dammed with iron. The mort safe was a brilliant, brutish solution, but it had its drawbacks. It was expensive, cumbersome, and frankly an ugly addition to a peaceful churchyard. It announced a family's fear to the world, and so the arms race didn't stop there. The ingenuity that was fueling the Industrial Revolution, the obsession with patents, mechanisms, and clever engineering was also applied to the problem of keeping the dead in their place. The next innovation you encounter is more subtle, and in many ways more devious. The target is the wife of a successful craftsman, a locksmith, as it turns out. The grave is in a respectable, but not ostentatiously wealthy, part of the cemetery. There's no mort safe, no sign of a vigil. It looks like a standard, straightforward job. You perform the usual efficient excavation, digging your narrow shaft down to the head of the coffin. Your shovel strikes wood. So far, so good. Jack kneels, ready to pry open the lid with his crowbar. He finds a purchase and heaves. There is the expected splintering sound, but the lid doesn't give. He tries again, putting his full weight into it. Still nothing. Confused, you and the other men clear more dirt away, exposing the top of the coffin. And then you see it. Crossing the lid are thick straps of iron bolted securely to the sides of the coffin. But that's not the worst part. Running along the inside edge of the lid is a series of interlocking iron teeth, like a massive, serrated jaw. The coffin is designed not just to be sealed, but to bite back. This is a security coffin, a patented invention for the discerning and fearful customer. You are looking at a product of the new market of posthumous protection. These devices were marvels of morbid engineering. One popular design, The patent iron coffin was cast entirely from iron, making it nearly impossible to break into with hand tools. Another featured spring-loaded mechanisms. If a resurrectionist tried to pry the lid, a system of internal springs would snap, firing iron bolts through the corpse and pinning it to the bottom of the coffin, effectively ruining it for dissection. A coffin that mutilates the very thing it's designed to protect, all despite the men trying to steal it. The locksmith, it seems, had an even more personal touch. Jack discovers that the main bolts holding the iron straps are false. When he tries to wrench them, he triggers a mechanism that releases the heavy iron bars that spring out from the sides of the coffin into the surrounding earth, anchoring it like a ship's keel. The coffin is now locked into the grave itself. The level of paranoia and ingenuity is almost comical. There were even rumors, likely exaggerated torpedoes. These were small, cast-iron explosive devices that would be buried on top of the coffin. If a digger's shovel struck it, the resulting explosion would, as one advertisement grimly put it, blow the body snatcher to atoms. How many of these were ever actually used is a point of intense debate among historians. No one has ever found definitive proof of a resurrectionist being dispatched by a coffin bomb. But the fear it generated was a powerful weapon in itself. You spend a frustrating hour trying to defeat the locksmith's creation, but it's no use. Every attempt to force it only seems to make it more secure. You are out-engineered, defeated by the professional pride of a man determined to protect his wife even in death. As you retreat once again, empty-handed, the implications are clear. The defenses are becoming more sophisticated. The enemy is no longer just a grieving son with a shotgun. It's the finest mechanical minds of the age. This isn't just about strong arms and a sturdy shovel anymore. It's becoming a battle of technology. And you, with your simple, traditional tools, are on the losing side. The more safe was a cage. This is a trap. It feels more personal, more intelligent. It's a direct challenge from the dead, a final, defiant click of a well-made lock. And with every failed attempt, the pressure mounts. The surgeons' demands for subjects are relentless. They don't care about iron straps or spring-loaded traps. They just want a fresh delivery at their back door. Your supply is dwindling, but the demand remains as high as ever. Terrifying economic equation is pushing your desperate trade towards even darker, more desperate solutions. The moored safes, the iron coffins, the nightly vigils, they all have one thing in common. They are the province of the prosperous. Iron is expensive. Time is a luxury. Hiring guards requires coin. As you and Jack's crew are repeatedly thwarted in the well-to parishes, a grim and unavoidable reality begins to dictate your movements. You are forced to hunt where the hunting is easiest. You find yourself working more and more in the poorest, most destitute corners of the city. The sprawling, anonymous burial grounds that serve the workhouses and the slums. Here there are no handsome headstones, no iron cages, no grieving families with shotguns. There is only a vast, muddy field of overlapping graves, marked with simple, numbered wooden pegs, if they are marked at all. This is where the city's poor are laid to rest, often in mass graves or pits, with a dozen or more coffins stacked one on top of the other. The coffins themselves are made of the thinnest, cheapest pine, often nailed together hastily by the workhouse carpenter. They offer about as much resistance as a cardboard box. The work here is different. It's faster, uglier, and somehow even more dehumanizing. There is no pretense of a single, sacred grave. You are not unearthing a person, you are mining a resource. You dig down into the soft, waterlogged earth, and it's simply a matter of finding the topmost, and therefore the freshest, coffin in the stack. One night, you are in a parish ground so overcrowded that old graves are constantly being disturbed to make way for the new. The ground is a churned minor soup of mud and bone fragments. There is no grass, only a slick, grey clay that pulls at your boots with every step. The air is heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. You work quickly, the soft thud of your shovels the only sound. There's an abundance of choice here, a grotesque and tragic surplus. You can tell the freshest graves by the mound of mounded dark earth. Within 20 minutes, you've reached a coffin. You pry it open. The body inside is that of an old woman, emaciated from a life of poverty and hunger. It's not a prime subject. The surgeons prefer healthier specimens. But beggars, as Jack is fond of saying, can't be choosers. You pull her out, wrap her in the sack, and immediately start filling the hole. But as you do, your shovel strikes another coffin just a foot or two deeper. The parish has buried them in layers like bricks in a wall. This is the brutal efficiency of poverty and death in the city. It's a chilling thought that the very system that created this poverty is what now makes its victims so vulnerable. The poor, who had no power or protection in life, have even less in death. Their bodies become the raw material that fuels the education of doctors who will, for the most part, go on to treat the wealthy clients who can afford their fees. The irony is as thick and suffocating as the London fog. This disproportionate targeting of the poor is a crucial, and often overlooked, aspect of the body-minus snatching era. The sensational stories tend to focus on the violation of respectable, middle-class graves. But the day-to-day reality of the trade was built on the anonymous, unprotected dead of the slums. Historians have analyzed parish records and workhouse burial logs, and the evidence is clear. The vast majority of bodies that ended up on the dissecting table came from these pauper graves. There's a strange, and rather sad, folk belief that arises from this reality. Some poor families would take a single possession of their deceased loved one, a clay pipe, a small crucifix, a child's toy, and break it, burying one half with the body and keeping the other. The belief was that, if the body were taken, the spirit would be unable to rest, forever searching for the missing piece. It's a heartbreaking small act of defiance, an attempt to create a spiritual mort safe where an iron one was impossible. As you haul the old woman's body through the dark streets, the sack feels lighter than usual, but the moral weight of it is heavier than ever. You are no longer a daring rogue, outwitting the rich and the powerful. You are a predator, a scavenger, feeding on the weakest and most defenseless members of the urban herd. The dark romance of the resurrectionist, if it ever existed, has been washed away by the grim, muddy reality of the pauper's pit. The fear is no longer just confined to the churchyards at night. It has seeped out from behind the cemetery walls and now permeates every aspect of daily life in the city. It has become a constant background hum of anxiety, a collective obsession that colors every conversation, every public gathering, every sad, slow funeral procession. You feel it when you walk through the markets. You see a crowd gathered around a newspaper vendor, listening with rapt, horrified attention as he reads aloud the latest lurid account of a desecrated grave. The story is almost certainly exaggerated for effect, filled with ghoulish deeds and shadowy figures, but the fear it generates is real. The word Burke, a name that hasn't yet earned its full, terrifying meaning but is starting to be whispered, is spoken in hushed, fearful tones. You see it in the faces of people you pass on the street. A funeral cart rumbles by, a simple wooden coffin jolting on the back. Once, this would have elicited quiet expressions of sympathy or a respectful doff of the cap. Now, the looks are different. There is pity, yes, but it's mixed with a kind of morbid calculation. You can almost see them thinking, whose men will be coming for that one tonight? The procession is no longer just a farewell, it's a prelude to a potential violation. Every mourner is a future victim of your trade. This pervasive atmosphere of fear begins to breed a dangerous paranoia. Neighbors start to eye each other with suspicion. Anyone new in a neighborhood, anyone who keeps odd hours or looks a bit rough, could be a resurrectionist. Medical students, once seen as respectable young men of science, are now viewed with a mixture of deep mistrust. You find yourself avoiding conversations about your studies, deflecting questions about what you do at the anatomy school. You are part of a tainted profession. A particularly strange manifestation of this city-wide terror is the funeral mob. If a funeral was for someone who died under suspicious circumstances, or if the person was simply unpopular, a crowd might gather, not to mourn but to ensure the body was actually buried. They feared that a fake funeral might be staged, a coffin filled with rocks buried in the ground, while the real body was whisked away to an anatomy school. These mobs would sometimes demand the coffin be opened for inspection before it was lowered into the ground, a grotesque public spectacle born of pure paranoia. This climate of fear makes your work infinitely more dangerous. The risk of being caught by an official watchman is almost secondary to the risk of being caught by a mob. If a group of armed guards in a cemetery catches you, you might get a beating and be handed over to the authorities. If an angry mob of citizens catches you, inflamed by gin and penny dreadful stories, you might not survive the night. Justice would be swift, brutal, and delivered with fists, boots, and cobblestones. Historians debate the true psychological impact of this anatomical terror on the populace. Did it genuinely alter the social fabric of the city, or was it just another of the many anxieties like fire, disease, and crime that were a part of urban life? The evidence suggests it was a unique and particularly insidious fear because it attacked something deeply personal and sacred, the right to a peaceful end. One evening, you were simply walking home from your lectures, a book of anatomical drawings under your arm. You pass a tavern just as a fight spills out into the street. It's a common enough sight. But then you hear the shout that freezes your blood. HES one of M, a student, a body snatcher. The accusation is hurled at a young man who looks terrified. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. The word is out. The crowd, already agitated, turns on him. He is no longer a person, he is a symbol of all their fears. He is the ghoul from the stories. You watch, hidden in a doorway, as he is surrounded, a wave of raw, violent panic washing over the street. You don't stay to see what happens. You just slip away into the shadows, your heart pounding. That could have been you, gripped by fear. The line between suspicion and condemnation is perilously thin, and accusation is as good as a sentence. The pressure in London has become immense. The combination of public vigilance, new security technologies, and a growing, violent paranoia is making the traditional work of a resurrection, nearly impossible. The supply of subjects for the city's anatomy schools has slowed to a desperate trickle. Jack's crew, like many others, is struggling. Nights of fruitless, risky work are becoming more common than successful hauls. It is during this time that whispers begin to arrive from the north. Tales from Edinburgh, a city that rivals London as a centre for medical education. The anatomy schools there, run by brilliant and ambitious men, are just as thirsty for subjects. And it seems that two men in that city have found a remarkable and horrificously efficient solution to the supply problem. Our story for a moment must leave the foggy, familiar streets of London and travel north to the grim, stone minus-built closes and windes of Edinburgh's old town. The city is a place of stark contrasts, of enlightened philosophy and abject poverty, oft unliving side minus by stoid. And in a cheap lodging house in a part of town called the Westport, you would find two Irish immigrants named William Burke and William Hare. They are not by trade resurrectionists. They are labourers, navigators, unremarkable men living on the absolute margins of society. Hare owns the lodging house, a squalid, transient place. Burke is one of his tenants. Their story, and their infamous entry into the anatomical trade, begins not with a shovel, but with a simple, unmet debt. One of their fellow lodgers, an old army pensioner, dies of natural causes in his bed. He happens to owe Hare £4 in back rent. This is a significant sum, and Hare is furious at the thought of losing it. As he and Burke grumble over their misfortune, a dark, opportunistic idea begins to form. They know about the anatomists at the university. They've heard the rumours, the stories of the high prices paid for fresh bodies. The old pensioner's corpse, lying in the other room, suddenly looks less like a liability and more like an asset. Here their story takes its first fateful turn. Why go to all the trouble of burying the man, only to have to dig him up again a day later? It seems like a ridiculous amount of wasted effort. Why not skip the middleman? Skip the undertaker, the priest, the coffin, the grave itself. Why not take the product directly from the source to the consumer? It's a moment of grim, entrepreneurial inspiration. That evening, before the authorities can be notified of the death, Burke and Hare pry up the floorboards in the old man's room, stuff his body into a large tea chest, and wait for darkness. They carry their heavy, illicit cargo through the winding streets to the doors of the Edinburgh University's medical school. They are directed to the private anatomy rooms of one of the city's most celebrated and popular lecturers, a charismatic and brilliant surgeon named Dr. Robert Knox. Knox's assistants are immediately impressed. The body is incredibly fresh. There are no dirt stains, no shovel marks, no signs of a struggle. They ask no questions about where it came from. Dr. Knox himself is delighted. He pays Burke and Hare the handsome sum of £7.10. This single transaction is a revelation for the two men. It's the easiest money they have ever made in their lives. No backminers breaking work in a cold cemetery, no risk of being caught by watchmen, no wrestling with iron coffins or mortar safes. It was a simple, clean, and incredibly profitable business transaction. The historical debate around this first transaction is fascinating. Did Burke and Hare truly stumble into this business by accident, as they later claimed? Or was the idea already planted, a dark seed of opportunism just waiting for the right circumstances to sprout? We can never be certain of their exact motivations, but the outcome is terrifyingly clear as they walk away from Dr. Knox's rooms, their pockets full of silver. A new and terrible business model has just been invented. They have solved the supply problem that plagued men like Dak in London. The only flaw in their plan is that they need to wait for another lodger to die of natural causes. And as the weeks go by, and the money begins to run out, Burke and Hare decide that they are not very patient men. The easy money from the old pensioner runs out quickly, spent on drink and fleeting comforts. But the memory of it, the sheer simplicity of the profit, lingers in the minds of Burke and Hare. They now see every person who walks into their squalid lodging house not as a tenant, but as a potential commodity. The problem, of course, is that their tenants are stubbornly unconventional alive. Their next opportunity arrives in the form of a lodger named Joseph the Miller, who has fallen ill with a fever. He is weak, delirious, and unlikely to be missed. Burke and Hare watch him, not with sympathy, but with a growing predatory impatience. They worry that if he recovers, their asset will be lost. They also worry that if his illness worsens and he becomes too visibly sick, the body will be less valuable to the anatomists. The window of opportunity is a narrow one. One evening, fueled by whiskey, their impatience boils over into a monstrous decision. They decide they can't wait for nature to take its course. They must help it along. They enter the sick man's room. Hare holds a pillow over the man's face while Burke, the larger and stronger of the two, lies across his chest, using his body weight to constrict the man's breathing and prevent any struggle. It is a terrifyingly intimate and brutally efficient method of murder. It is quiet, it requires no special weapons, and, most importantly for their new trade, it leaves almost no discernible marks on the body. No bruises, no cuts, no signs of violence. To an anatomist's eye, the resulting corpse would appear to have died from natural causes, perhaps suffocation from a sudden illness. This method would become so infamous that it would eventually add a new, sinister verb to the English language to Burke. They pack Joseph the Miller into another tea chest and deliver him to drive Knox's rooms. Once again, the assistants are thrilled with the quality of the subject. It is perfectly fresh. Knox himself is said to have been particularly pleased. They are paid another £10. The Rubicon has been crossed. They are no longer opportunistic scavengers, they are now active hunters. Their lodging house in the West Port has been transformed into a human slaughterhouse. And so begins a terrifying killing spree that will last for the better part of a year. Their victims are the most vulnerable people in Edinburgh society. They prey on the transient, the poor, the lonely. An old woman named Abigail Simpson, who came to the city to collect a small pension. A young woman named Mary Patterson, known on the streets for her beauty. A grandmother and her young, deaf grandson, David, who were lured into the lodging house with the promise of a warm bed. The pattern is always the same. They would ply their chosen victim with drink, waiting until they were in a stupor. And then Burke and Hare, often with the help of their female companions, would commit the murder. The act itself was a chillingly domestic form of horror, taking place not in a dark alley, but in a shabby room, next to a dying fire. The sheer audacity of their enterprise is staggering. They killed at least 16 people, and possibly more. Each body was sold to Drive. Knox, who continued to praise the remarkable freshness of the specimens his new suppliers were providing. It's one of the great, unsettling questions of this whole affair, a topic historians still fiercely debate. How much did Drive Knox know? Did he truly believe that this string of perfectly preserved bodies was just a run of good luck for his suppliers? Or did he choose willful blindness, deliberately not asking the questions whose answers might disrupt his unprecedentedly reliable supply chain? Burke and Hare had perfected their business model. They had bypassed the cemetery. They had created a vertically integrated system for the production of cadavers, from sourcing the raw material to delivering the finished product. They had taken the grim logic of the Resurrectionists' trade to its final, horrifying conclusion. If the demand is for the freshly dead, the most efficient way to meet that demand is to create them yourself. Let us leave the grim, whiskey-minus-soaked squalor of the Westport lodging house for a moment, and step into a different world entirely. A world of intellectual fervor, ambition, and the bright, clean light of science. You find yourself once again on a steep wooden bench. But this is not London. This is Edinburgh. And you are in the private anatomy theatre of Drive, Robert Knox. The room is packed overflowing. Students are crammed into every available space, sitting on the stairs, leaning over the railings. The energy in the air is electric. Dr. Nomenon, a former army surgeon. He is a brilliant, flamboyant speaker with a piercing gaze and an almost theatrical flair. He can make the intricate network of the human nervous system sound like a thrilling adventure story. To the aspiring young doctors of Edinburgh, he is a scientific rock star, and his popularity is built on one simple, undeniable fact. Dr. Knox always has a subject. While other lecturers have to delay classes or force students to share a single, decaying corpse for weeks, Knox's supply is seemingly endless. Almost every lecture features a fresh specimen, laid out on the table, ready to reveal its secrets. It is an astonishing competitive advantage. You are witnessing a master at his work. He moves with a confident grace, his scalpel a natural extension of his hand. He speaks with a booming, captivating voice, dissecting not just the body, but the very mysteries of life and death. And the body he is working on today is, like so many of his recent acquisitions, perfect. There are no shovel marks, no dirt under the fingernails, no signs of a rough exhumation. It is as if this person simply lay down on the table and rolled themselves into a state of anatomical readiness. Now, imagine the scene in the back rooms of this esteemed establishment, away from the adoring eyes of the students. This is where the real business happens. Dr. Knox employs a team of assistants and dissectors, men who act as his gatekeepers. When a rough-looking Irishman like Burke and Hare arrive with a tea chest or a large sack, it is these assistants who conduct the initial transaction. The policy, unspoken but absolute, is no questions asked. The origin of the body is of no concern. The only criteria are freshness and a lack of external damage. Burke and Hare's products are, by these standards, of the highest possible quality. The transaction is swift and professional. The tea chest is opened, the goods are inspected, a price is agreed upon, and the cash is paid. Burke and Hare are then sent on their way, instructed to bring any other unfortunates they might find directly to him. And this is the great, dark question that hangs over this entire affair, a question that historians and ethicists still debate with ferocious intensity. What did Dr. Knox know? On one hand, the world of anatomical supply was inherently secretive and sordid. Every single anatomist in Britain at the time was dealing with resurrectionists. It was standard practice to turn a blind eye, to not inquire too deeply into the origins of a delivery. Knox, his defenders would argue, was simply the beneficiary of a particularly efficient, if unusually lucky, team of body snatchers. He was a man of science, consumed with his research and teaching, and perhaps he simply did not have the time or the inclination to question his good fortune. But on the other hand, the sheer volume and consistency are staggering. 16 bodies in less than a year, all delivered by the same two men. All in a state of impossible freshness. A single stroke of luck is one thing. A constant, uninterrupted torrent of it begins to look less like fortune and more like a conspiracy. Then there are the more chilling details. Some of the victims, like the beautiful young Mary Patterson, were known figures in the city. There are accounts, perhaps apocryphal but persistent, that one of Knox's own students recognized her on the dissecting table, but was either too intimidated or too shocked to speak up. Could a man as sharp and perceptive as Knox truly have been oblivious to the fact that his anatomy school was being supplied by a pair of serial murderers? Or did he make a cold, calculated decision that the advancement of medical science was worth the cost, whatever that cost might be? This is the uncomfortable paradox of Dr. Robert Knox. The knowledge he imparted, using the bodies of Burke and Hare's victims, was genuine. His students went on to become skilled surgeons, saving countless lives. His anatomical atlas was a landmark text. From a purely scientific perspective, his work was a triumph. But it was a triumph built on a foundation of murder, paid for with cash in a back alley and cloaked in a veil of willful, deliberate ignorance. The gruesome enterprise of Burke and Hare could not last forever. Such a brazen and prolific operation, even in the sprawling anonymity of a 19th-century city, was bound to unravel. The end came not through brilliant detective work or a pang of conscience, but through a simple, mundane act of carelessness and the suspicion of their fellow tenants. Their final victim was an Irish woman named Margaret Docherty. Burke lured her to the lodging house with the promise of hospitality, claiming they were distant relations. As was their custom, they plied her with drink during a raucous party. But this time they made a mistake. Two other lodgers, a married couple named Anne and James Gray, were also present. Burke, eager to get on with his grim business, became aggressive in trying to get the Grays to leave, which made them suspicious. The next morning, the Grays returned to the lodging house to collect some of their belongings. They were told that Margaret Docherty had left. Button Gray, looking for her stockings, checked under one of the beds. There, amidst a pile of straw, she felt something large, cold, and unavailable human. It was the naked body of the woman she had been drinking with just the night before. Screaming, she and her husband fled the house and went straight to the police. The authorities, now alerted, arrived at the lodging house. The body was gone. Burke and Hare had already packed it up and delivered it to Drive. Knox's dissecting rooms that morning. But the evidence was overwhelming. The Grays' testimony, combined with the suspicious behavior of Burke and his accomplice, was enough. The police went to Knox's establishment and, in a cellar, they found the body of Margaret Docherty, waiting for dissection. James Gray was able to positively identify her. The game was up. Burke, Hare, and their female companions were arrested. The city of Edinburgh, which had been living with a nameless dread, now had a name for its terror, and the news of their crimes exploded, sending a shockwave of horror not just through Scotland, but across the entire British Isles. The penny dreadfulness in London, which had been filled with tales of ghoulish grave robbers, now had a new, far more terrifying story to tell. The trial was a sensation. The public was hungry for justice, and the courtroom was packed every day. However, the prosecution faced a significant legal problem. They had a string of dead bodies, and they had the culprits, but they had no direct physical evidence linking the two. The murders were, by their very nature, designed to be traceless. They had no witnesses to the actual killings. The case was largely circumstantial. To secure a conviction, the Lord Advocate, Scotland's chief prosecutor, made a controversial decision. He offered immunity to one of the murderers in exchange for his testimony against the other. He offered the deal to William Hare. Hare, showing no loyalty whatsoever, immediately accepted. He agreed to confess to everything, detailing every single murder, in exchange for his own freedom. It's a legal maneuver that is still debated by scholars today. Was it a necessary evil to ensure the conviction of at least one of the killers, or was it a miscarriage of justice that allowed an equally guilty man to walk free? Hare's testimony was damning. Over several days he stood in the witness box and, in a cold, matter-of-fact tone, recounted the gruesome details of their year-long killing spree. He described the method, the victims, the deliveries to Drive, Knox. The courtroom listened in stunned, horrified silence. The public, Reading the accounts in the newspapers was enraged. Based on Hare's testimony, William Burke was found guilty and sentenced to death. His execution was a massive public event. A crowd of tens of thousands, far larger than any normal hanging, gathered to see him die. They didn't cheer as they might for a dashing highwayman. They roared. They howled for his blood, their voices filled with a year's worth of pent-up fear and outrage. But their rage was not reserved for Burke alone. As he dropped from the gallows, the crowd's anger turned towards another man, the man they saw as the ultimate author of these crimes, Dr. Robert Knox. He was never charged with any crime. There was no proof he was anything more than a negligent, if highly ambitious, buyer of illicit goods. But in the court of public opinion, he was as guilty as Burke. Mobs formed outside his house, burning him in effigy. His career, once so brilliant, was ruined. He became a pariah, a man forever associated with the ghoulish rhyme that children now sang in the streets. Up the close and down the stair, button Ben W.I. Burke and Hare. Burke's the butcher, Hare's the thief, Knox the boy that buys the beef. The downfall of Burke and Hare was more than just the end of a murder spree. It was a catalyst. It laid bare the entire rotten, corrupt system of anatomical supply in a way that no number of robbed graves ever could. The public could no longer dismiss it as a sordid affair between ghouls and doctors. Murder had entered the equation. And now, something had to be done. The execution of William Burke and the subsequent public disgrace of Dr. Knox was a dramatic climax to the Edinburgh horror story. You might think that such a shocking and widely publicized case would have put an immediate and decisive end to the entire sordid business, but you would be wrong. The human capacity for ghoulish imitation, especially when poverty and opportunity collide, is a powerful force. The Burke and Hare trial didn't just create a legend, it created a blueprint. For a certain kind of desperate, morally bankrupt individual, the story was not a cautionary tale, but an instruction manual. The demand for fresh bodies in London was still just as high, if not higher than in Edinburgh. The anatomy schools were still starved for subjects. The price was still right. And now, there was a proven new method of supply that didn't involve the risk and hard labor of digging. The contagion of Burking, as the press morbidly dubbed the new crime, soon spread south. And you, still operating in the shadows of London's illicit trade, begin to hear the whispers. Stories of men who, like Burke and Hare, had decided to skip the graveyard altogether. In London, the most infamous of these copycats were a group known as the London Resurrectionists. Their gang was centered around two men, John Bishop and Thomas Williams. Like their Scottish predecessors, they were not men of high standing. They were former resurrectionists, men who knew the trade from the ground up. They knew the back doors of the anatomy schools. They knew the back doors of the anatomy schools. They knew the desperation of the surgeons, and they were tired of the increasing difficulty of their work, the not safe, the armed guards, the diminishing returns. They saw the Burke and Hare method as a brilliant, if brutal, business innovation. Their base of operations was a small, grim cottage near Bethnal Green, not far from the very cemetery where you had your first taste of the Resurrectionist's trade. Their method was a slight variation on the original. They would find their victims among the city's drifters and homeless. One of their most known victims was a young Italian street vendor, a boy named Carlo Ferrari. They lured him to their cottage, plied him with rum laced with laudanum, a powerful opiate, and then, once he was unconscious, they drowned him in a well in their backyard. Just like the original method, this left the body largely unmarked and, to a casual observer, looking as if it had died from natural causes or simple intoxication. It was the perfect product for the anatomical market. They then took the boy's body to the prestigious King's College School of Anatomy. This is a detail that still chills historians. This wasn't some backman, a Sally quack. This was one of the premier medical institutions in the world. The surgeons and assistants at King's College were immediately impressed by the freshness of the subject. They agreed on a price of 9 guineas. However, the London Resurrectionists were not as practiced or as lucky as their Scottish counterparts. The assistants at King's College, perhaps on higher alert after the recent scandal in Edinburgh, grew suspicious. The body seemed a little too fresh. The discoloration around the neck and the state of the boy's teeth seemed inconsistent with a natural death. One of the chief lecturers, a man named Richard Partridge, decided to alert the authorities. When the police raided the cottage in Bethnal Green, they found a collection of clothes belonging to several missing persons. In the backyard, buried in a shallow pit, they found the bodies of 2 more victims, a woman and a young boy. The gang, it turned out, had been in business for some time. The trial of the London Burke arrest was another public sensation, a horrifying echo of the Edinburgh case just a few years earlier. The public, who had hoped the execution of Burke had put an end to such horrors, was appalled to learn that the monster was not a foreign, but was living right here, in the heart of their own city. The fear, which had begun to subside, came roaring back with a vengeance. Now, the threat wasn't just in the graveyard after you were dead. It was in the friendly offer of a drink from a stranger in a tavern while you were still very much alive. The anatomical terror had reached its absolute peak. The trial of the London Burke arrest is the final, horrifying straw. The public outcry, which had been a rising tide of fear and anger for years, now becomes an unstoppable flood. It is no longer a localized panic or a morbid fascination confined to the pages of the penny dreadfullest. The horror has moved from the slums of Edinburgh and Bethnal Green into the drawing rooms and debating chambers of the nation's elite. You can feel the shift in the city's atmosphere. The conversation is no longer just about ghouls and murderers, it's about responsibility. The rage of the public, once directed at the ghouls in the graveyard and the monsters in the lodging houses, now turns its full force upon the 2 groups, seen as the ultimate source of the problem: the doctors, who created the demand, and the politicians who had failed to address the issue. Newspapers like The Times, which had previously treated the issue with a certain degree of morbid detachment, now run thunderous editorials. They paint a picture of a society that has lost its moral compass, where the sanctity of the grave is sacrificed for science, and the lives of the poor are considered expendable. They ask pointed, uncomfortable questions. How could the most respected surgeons in the land be complicit in such a gruesome, criminal enterprise? The seat of the nation's law and order allowed this barbaric situation to persist for decades. The pressure on the medical establishment is immense. Men like Sir Astley Cooper, one of the most famous and wealthy surgeons of the age, are called before parliamentary committees. You can imagine the scene: these titans of medicine, men used to being treated with absolute deference, are now forced to sit and answer pointed questions from politicians. In his testimony, Cooper makes a now famous, and shockingly blunt, admission. There is no person, let his situation in life be what it may, he states, whom if I were disposed to dissect, I could not obtain. It is a stunning confession of the power and reach of the Resurrectionist network. He is essentially telling Parliament that the body of any person in the kingdom, from a pauper to a prince, could be procured for a price. He is not bragging. He is trying to make them understand the scale of the problem. He argues that as long as the law restricts the legal supply of bodies, a violent and uncontrollable black market is not just likely, but absolutely inevitable. This is a point that legal historians find crucial. The doctors, for the first time, are publicly admitting their dependence on the illegal trade and framing it not as a moral failing, but as a systemic necessity. They are, in a sense, holding a scalpel to the throat of the establishment and saying, "Give us a legal way to do our work, or this horror will continue." The pressure on the politicians is equally intense. They are being bombarded with petitions from the public. Their constituents are terrified. The image of Great Britain as a civilized, Christian nation is being tarnished by these barbaric tales of Burke. The scandal is becoming an international embarrassment. The nation that is leading the world in industrial and imperial might cannot seem to keep its own dead safely in the ground. You can almost feel the grinding of the gears of government as they are slowly, reluctantly forced to turn. For decades, Parliament had avoided this issue. It was distasteful. It pitted the deeply held religious beliefs of the majority against the needs of an elite scientific minority. Any proposed solution was bound to be unpopular. But the London Burke arrest case has changed the political calculus. The cost of inaction, of continued public terror, murder, and mob violence, is now clearly higher than the cost of a difficult and controversial piece of legislation. The time for whispers, half-minus measures, and turning a blind eye is over. The roar of public opinion is now so loud that it is echoing through the hallowed halls of Westminster. The men who run the country can no longer pretend they don't hear it. They have been shamed, horrified, and ultimately forced to act. The system is broken, and everyone, from the poorest pauper to the most powerful lord, now knows it. The deafening public outcry and the stark admissions from the medical establishment finally achieve what decades of grave robbing could not. They force the hand of the British Parliament. The debate is no longer if something should be done, but what should be done. And so in the grand, wood-minus-spanelled chambers of Westminster, a piece of legislation begins to take shape that will fundamentally and permanently alter the relationship between death, poverty, and medicine. It will be called the Anatomy Act of 1832. The man who champions this bill is a politician and reformer named Henry Warburton. He is a radical MP, a man with a scientific background and a pragmatic, unsentimental approach to problem-solving. He sees the issue not as a matter of morality or religious sacrilege, but as a simple, brutal equation of supply and demand. The demand from the anatomists is not going to go away. In fact, as medicine advances, it will only increase. Therefore, the only logical solution is to create a new, legal, and plentiful supply. But where will this new supply come from? This is the heart of the controversy. The early proposals are met with fierce resistance. One idea is to allow individuals to voluntarily donate their bodies to science. This is a noble thought, but in the early 19th century, it's a complete non-starter. The idea of willingly surrendering your earthly remains to the dissector's knife is, for the vast majority of the population, a deeply horrifying and impious thought. Voluntary donation would provide a mere trickle of bodies, not the river that's needed. The debate rages inside and outside of Parliament. The press is filled with furious letters. Preachers thunder from their pulpits about the desecration of God's creation. But Warburton and his supporters push forward, driven by the chilling memory of Burke and Hare. Finally, they arrive at a solution. It is a solution that is pragmatic, effective, and deeply, uncomfortably rooted in the class divisions of the era. The Anatomy Act of 1832 proposes that the legal supply of bodies for dissection will come from the unclaimed dead. Specifically, the bodies of those who die in workhouses, hospitals, and prisons, and whose bodies are not claimed for burial by any family members. You can see the cold utilitarian logic of it. These are the people who, in life, were a ward of the state. In death, the state will now claim their final possession, their own body. It is a direct and legal replacement for the old system. Before the act, it was the unprotected bodies of the poor that were being illegally stolen from their graves. After the act, it will be the unclaimed bodies of the poor that are legally appropriated from the workhouse morgue. The act is, in essence, a masterpiece of legislative redirection. It doesn't eliminate the grim reality of the poor ending up on the dissecting table. It simply legitimizes it. It takes the business out of the hands of criminals like you and Jack, and puts it into the hands of parish officials and hospital administrators. The passage of the act is a landmark moment. For the medical community, it is a massive victory. They now have a legal, regulated, and steady supply of subjects. They can conduct their research and teaching without resorting to the criminal underworld. The advancement of medical science is now secured. But for the poor, the act is seen as a final, terrifying indignity. The workhouse, already a place of dread and last resort, now has a new horror attached to it. The fear of dying in the workhouse is now compounded by the fear of what will happen to your body after you die. It becomes known in the bitter slang of the slums as the Anatomy Bill. The deep-seated terror of the surgeon's knife is now enshrined in law, and it is a terror reserved almost exclusively for the most vulnerable members of society. This is a point historians emphasize. The Anatomy Act was not a perfect or an enlightened piece of legislation. It was a brutally pragmatic solution to a horrific problem, and it solved that problem by reinforcing the era's harshest social inequalities. It ended the murders, it largely ended the grave robbing, but it did so at a profound cost to the dignity of the poor. As you stand in the shadows of the London night, you realize the ground beneath your feet is shifting. The very foundation of your dark and dangerous profession is about to be washed away by the stroke of a royal pen. The passage of the Anatomy Act is not like a sudden slamming of a door. It's more like a slow, inexorable turning of a massive valve. The flow of bodies from the criminal underworld doesn't stop overnight, but it begins to diminish, week by week, month by month. The river of supply that you have been navigating is being diverted. In the first few months after the act becomes law, you unjack's crew try to carry on as usual. The surgeons are creatures of habit, and their demand is still high. But you start to notice a change at the back door of the anatomy school. The transactions become more nervous, the assistants more hesitant. The prices they are willing to pay begin to drop. Why pay 10 guineas for a risky, illegally procured subject when a perfectly legal one can be had from the local workhouse for the cost of the paperwork? The new, legitimate system begins to ramp up. Carts from the workhouses and parish hospitals, once symbols of destitution, now become the official, sanitized couriers of the dead to the medical schools. The transactions are no longer done with a sack of coins in a dark alley, but with ledgers and receipts in a well-lit office. The whole process is being brought out of the shadows and into the bland, bureaucratic light of day. This new competition is one you simply cannot fight. You can't compete with the state. The workhouses have a scale of supply that no gang of resurrectionists, no matter how efficient, could ever hope to match. The effect on your trade is devastating. The turf wars that once seemed so important, the fights over the burial grounds of Southwark or Bethnal Green, now seem pointless. The territories you fought for are becoming worthless. The value of the product they contain is plummeting. You witness the decline firsthand. You see the desperation in Jack's eyes. He tries to undercut the official price, offering bodies at a bargain rate, but the risk for the surgeons is now too high. Being caught dealing with a resurrection IST is no longer a professional embarrassment. It's a serious crime, a flagrant violation of a new and highly publicized law. The risk-reward calculation has irrevocably shifted against you. The gangs begin to break apart. The men who made a living from this gruesome trade for years are now forced to find other work. The muscle, the big silent men, drift back to the docks or to manual labor. The scouts and informants find their information is no longer a valuable commodity. The entire shadow economy, which once thrived in the city's graveyards, begins to wither and die. This period of decline leads to one last, strange spasm of the trade, something historians of the era find particularly interesting. With the London market drying up, some of the more enterprising resurrectionists tried to export their goods. They would pack bodies in barrels of brine or whiskey and ship them by sea to cities like Edinburgh, where the local supply might still be lagging behind demand. It was a ghoulish and often unsuccessful enterprise. The pickled subjects would be discovered by suspicious sailors or customs officials, leading to a minor scandal and a swift arrest. One night, you are sitting with Jack in the usual pub. It's quiet now. The boisterous energy of the other crews is gone. It's just the two of you, nursing cheap hurls. He stares into his mug, a man whose entire world, whose entire set of specialized and nightmarish skills, has been rendered obsolete by an act of parliament. It's over, he says, his voice a low, defeated rumble. The toffs in their big house have put us out of business. There's no anger in his voice, just a sense of weary resignation. He is a casualty of progress. He and men like him were a necessary evil for a time, a gruesome symptom of a broken system. But the system has now been fixed, or at least patched over, and the symptom is no longer needed. You look at your own hands that have grown calloused from the shovel, hands that have hauled the dead from their graves. You have been a part of this dark chapter. You have walked a path that few would ever dare to tread. But that path is now coming to a dead end. The era of the resurrection IST is over. Your last stand was not a blaze of glory or a dramatic shootout in a graveyard. It was a quiet, slow, and inevitable fade into obsolescence. Your own part in this grim story is over. You quietly pocket the last of your illicit earnings, hang up your shovel for good, and melt back into the world of legitimate medical study. You have a trove of anatomical knowledge that few of your peers can match. Learn it not just in the lecture hall but in the cold, damp earth. It is a secret you will carry with you for the rest of your life. As the years pass, the practice of body snatching fades from a terrifying reality into a ghoulish memory, and then into something else entirely, a powerful and enduring legend. The fear and fascination that once gripped the city do not simply disappear. Instead, they are channeled into the new and burgeoning genre of Gothic literature. The Resurrectionist, the ghoul, the mad scientist, these figures step out of the penny dreadfulescent onto the pages of some of the most influential stories ever written. You see it in the work of Mary Shelley, her masterpiece Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, published in 1818, was conceived and written at the very height of the body-snatching panic. The story of Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant and obsessive student of anatomy and the decay of the human frame, who pieces together a creature from the mismatched parts of corpses gathered from the dissecting room and the slaughter-minus house, is a direct reflection of the era's deepest anxieties. The novel taps into the public sphere of ambitious, God-playing scientists who have overstepped the moral boundaries in their quest for knowledge. Dr. Frankenstein is, in many ways, the ultimate anatomist, and his grotesque creation is the logical, horrifying extension of a science that relies on the harvested dead. Then you see the influence ripple across the Atlantic to the dark, feverish imagination of Edgar Allan Poe. His tales are filled with a morbid obsession with premature burial, the violation of the grave, and the porous boundary between life and death. In a story like The Premature Burial, the terror is not of being snatched after death, but of being mistaken for dead and waking up in a coffin, a very real fear in an age before modern medical diagnostics. And in the tale Hare, the narrator's obsession with a dismembered body hidden under the floorboards echoes the grim reality of the domestic horrors perpetrated by Burke and Hare. Even Charles Dickens, the great chronicler of London life, touches upon the trade. In A Tale of Two Cities, the character of Jerry Cruncher presents himself as an honest tradesman by day, but by night he is a resurrectionist, returning from his work with muddy boots and rusty fingers. Dickens uses him not just for ghoulish effect, but as a symbol of the dark, hidden economies that thrived beneath the surface of respectable society. It's a fascinating process to witness. The raw, visceral fear of a generation is being distilled into literary myth. The very real terror of having your grandmother's grave robbed is transformed into a sophisticated exploration of scientific hubris, mortality, and the darkness within the human soul. The debate about whether Mary Shelley was directly inspired by a specific anatomist or resurrectionist gang is one that literary scholars still enjoy. But the thematic connection is undeniable. The dark soil of the London and Edinburgh churchyards proved to be incredibly fertile ground for the seeds of Gothic horror. You, who once lived that reality, now see it reflected back at you in the pages of a book or a story whispered by the fire. The figure of the body snatcher becomes a stock character, a bogeyman used to frighten children. The complex, desperate reality of the trade, the poverty, the class inequality, the genuine scientific need, is smoothed over and simplified, flattened into a thrilling, terrifying archetype. Your strange, secret profession has achieved a kind of immortality. It has become a permanent part of the cultural nightmare. The stories are now just stories, their sharp, terrifying edges once smoothed by time, transformed into the pleasurable thrill of Gothic fiction. The reality of your trade has become a myth, a dark fairy tale. But as you leave the world of ink-stained pages and flickering candlelight, you are left with the story's final, most unsettling question. Was it all just for nothing? Was it just a sordid, criminal enterprise? A tale of ghouls and murderers? Or did ghouls and murderers, all that desecration, actually lead to something good? This is the great, uncomfortable paradox of progress. To understand the answer, you have to remember what surgery was like before this era. Before the anatomists had their steady, if illicit, supply of the dead. It was not a science, it was a desperate, bloody craft, a form of controlled butchery. Surgeons were often seen as little more than tradesmen with strong stomachs. Their primary skill was speed. An amputation had to be performed in a matter of minutes, sometimes seconds, before the patient died of shock and blood loss. The surgeon's soul was a blur. The screams were deafening, and survival was far from guaranteed. Internal surgery was almost unthinkable. The inside of the human body was a terra incognita, a mysterious and terrifying landscape. The surgeon might dare to remove a stone from a bladder, but venturing into the abdomen to fix an ailment was a death sentence. They simply didn't have the map. They didn't know where the major arteries ran. They didn't understand how the organs were connected. They couldn't trace the delicate pathways of the nerves. But the hundreds and then thousands of bodies that you and men, like you, delivered to the back doors of the anatomy schools changed everything. Each body was a new map, a new page in the atlas of human life. On the dissecting tables of London and Edinburgh, the secrets of the human machine were finally being laid bare. Surgeons learned for the first time the precise and intricate dance of the circulatory system. This knowledge allowed them to develop techniques for lighting arteries, tying them off, which was a revolutionary improvement over the old method of cauterizing a wound with a red-hot iron. They mapped the nervous system, understanding which nerves controlled which muscles, allowing them to operate without inadvertently paralyzing their patients. They learned the exact location and function of the internal organs, which would eventually make the life-saving abdominal surgeries of the future possible. Every successful operation, every life saved, every ounce of pain eased in the century that followed, owes a small, unaccountable debt to a resurrectionist in the nameless corpse he pulled from a pauper's grave. The clean, well-lit operating theatre of the modern age is built upon the foundation of 1,000 dark and muddy churchyards. Consider this strange legacy. The great anatomists of the age, men like William and John Hunter, amassed vast personal collections of anatomical specimens. They had private museums filled with preserved organs, dissected limbs, and articulated skeletons, all kept in jars of preserving fluid. These collections were their libraries, their life's work, but every single specimen in those jars, which became the basis for medical education for generations, had a hidden history. Each one was the result of a transaction in a dark alley, a body procured by a man with a shovel, or, even more grimly, by the likes of Burke and Hare. And this brings us to the central, unsettling question that hangs over this entire period, a question that medical historians and ethicists still wrestle with to this day. Did the ends justify the means? Was this period of anatomical terror a necessary evil, a dark but essential chapter in the story of medicine that we had to endure to get to where we are now? Or was the cost, the violation of graves, the terrorizing of the public, the literal murder of the innocent, simply too high a price to pay for knowledge? There is no easy answer. It is a messy, morally complex equation. You, who stood in the mud and the dark, who felt the weight of the sack on your shoulder, who took the blood money and used it to learn your craft, you are a living part of that equation. You can see the direct line from the splintered coffin lid to the surgeon's steady, life-saving hand. You know with a certainty that no historian could ever truly grasp that the progress was real, but you also know the cost. You remember the fear in the city, the guarded graves, the names of the murdered whispered in the headlines. And so the paradox settles in your mind, unresolved. A story of scientific triumph, built on a foundation of human misery, a quiet, profound debt to the dead that can never truly be repaid. And so the frantic, terrifying noise of this era begins to fade. The howls of the mob at Burke's execution, the splintering crack of a coffin lid, the desperate whispers in the back rooms of the anatomy schools, all of it recedes, replaced by the quiet, steady march of time. The story, like the bodies it concerned, is finally laid to rest. Your own life moves on. You become a doctor, a good one, your hands made steady by a knowledge that was purchased at a heavy price. The secrets of your youthful nights in the churchyards are buried deeper than any coffin. They become a silent, invisible part of you, a shadow that walks with you through the clean, sunlit hospital wards. Let us take one final walk, you and I, away from the bustling city in the halls of science. Let us go to a place of peace, a place where this story can find its gentle end. We find ourselves in an old, slightly neglected churchyard, perhaps on a quiet hillside on the outskirts of Edinburgh. It is a late afternoon in the present day. The sun is low in the sky, casting long, soft shadows across the grass. and the only sounds are the rustling of leaves in the ancient trees and the distant call of a bird. The headstones here are old, their inscriptions softened and blurred by centuries of wind and rain. They lean at odd angles, like old men asleep in their chairs. It is a place of profound and enduring peace. It is everything a final resting place is supposed to be. And then, near the old stone wall, half minus hidden by a tangle of ivy and wildflowers, you see it. It is a mort safe. It is rusted, the iron turned a deep, flaky orange minus brown. One of its thick bars is cracked with age. A small sapling has grown up through the grill. Its green leaves are stark, living contrast to the dead iron. It sits over a grave that has no name, the headstone having long since crumbled to dust. You reach out and touch the cold, rough metal. This object, which once represented the absolute peak of fear and paranoia, now seems quaint. A relic, a strange, silent monument to a forgotten terror. It is a physical echo of a time when the dead could not rest, a time when grief was accompanied by the grim necessity of armed guards and iron cages. Looking at this rusty cage, you can trace the entire arc of our story. You can feel the desperate need of the brilliant doctor in his anatomy theater. You can sense the grim, opportunistic logic of the men with shovels who saw a market in the graveyards. You can see the terror of the grieving families, huddled by the graveside with their lanterns or shotguns. You can feel the cold, calculating innovation of Burke and Hare, and the public revulsion that finally forced the hand of Parliament. And you can understand the uncomfortable truth that all of it, the grave robbing, the technology of fear, the murders, the legislation, was woven together, a dark and tangled knot that ultimately, and against all odds, helped to birth the age of modern medicine. The debate over the morality of it all is a question for the waking world, a complex and perhaps unanswerable puzzle. Historians will continue to argue, as they should, about the ethics and the costs. But here in the quiet of this overgrown churchyard, with the sun setting and the shadows deepening, there are no arguments. There is only the silence. The rusty mort safe does not judge. It simply is. A silent testament to a time when science and survival, grief and greed, progress and predation were locked in a strange and terrible embrace. It is the final, quiet punctuation mark at the end of a long and harrowing sentence. And now, at last, all is still, can finally truly rest in peace. And so our journey into the shadows of the past comes to its peaceful end. The echoes of the shovel on the coffin lid have faded, replaced now by the quiet hum of your own room. The story is over, and it can be allowed to drift away, like a fog lifting from a moonlit churchyard. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing more to understand, just the simple, gentle feeling of rest. You can feel a pleasant heaviness beginning to settle deep within you, a comforting weight in your limbs as your mind begins to wander into its own soft landscapes. The details of the story might begin to blur, mixing with your own thoughts, your own memories, becoming the very fabric of an emerging dream. That is perfectly all right. Your only task now is to allow this quiet moment to deepen, to let the gentle tide of slumber carry you out into a calm and peaceful sea of sleep. The candle of our story has now flickered out. If you still see a light in your mind's eye, perhaps another of my videos can help it dim. I wish you the deepest rest. Good night.